The topic is the responsibility of parenting in the home, and it's a little bit overwhelming to think about covering parenting in 45 minutes or 3 hours or whatever I got here. And it's a challenge, but I wanted to talk about the responsibility part. You know, today we face a lot of challenges in our country, our culture, challenging even the idea of what a family is, trying to redefine everything. And we're all aware of the bad things that are happening here and there. We're also aware of statistics. We are very much, or we should be very much aware of the importance of family, especially when we talk about statistics, because the majority of people that are successful in the world around us, how the world defines success, are that way when they have good, strong family structure. It's incredibly important to children when they're being raised that they have two parents in the home, that they have a stable home. They have such a great advantage in life when they have those kinds of things. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't have that. And so tonight's lesson is not about making everyone feel bad about having a bad family or anything like that. It's to hopefully encourage. My thinking today is, even if you don't have a good family, when we go through these principles, we should be able to look at these things and determine for ourselves that we can grow into those things, whether we have parents that are teaching us these things or not, for the younger children. And I know that may be quite a challenge, but look over in 1 Samuel chapter 2. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But I titled this differently than what I was assigned, and maybe it's because it just helps me. But this is really just, for me, this is 5 steps to faithful children. And we're talking about education, and that's really what I'm going to spend all the time talking about, what education is, what it should be, what it does to a family. And you're going to see in that's the responsibility of parenting, true education, as we raise them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. 1 Samuel chapter 2, I guess I should turn there myself. 1 Samuel chapter 2, we have the account of Eli and Eli's sons who were evil. Now, Eli, of course, was the high priest, and it says that the sons of Eli were corrupt. They did not know the Lord, and the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest's servant would come and the three-pronged flesh hook in his hand while the meat was boiling. Then he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and the priest would take for himself all that the flesh hook brought up. So they did in Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Also, before they burned the fat, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who sacrificed, "Give meat for roasting to the priest, for he will not take boiled meat from you, but raw." Now, all these things are in violation of the law of Moses. And it says, and if a man said to him, "They should really burn the fat first, then you may take as much as your heart desires," he would answer them, "No, but you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force." Therefore, the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord, for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. Now, here these priests are behaving badly. And what happened is it caused then the people to abhor the offering of the Lord. They didn't even like going to take the offering anymore because of the experiences, the bad experiences they were going through. This is a serious situation. And if you look further in verse 22, it says, Eli was very old, and he had heard everything his sons did to all Israel, and how they lay with women who assembled at the door of the tabernacle meeting. So it's pretty bad things going on. So he said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all the people. Now, my sons, for it is not a good report that I hear, you make the Lord's people transgress. If one man sins against another, God will judge him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him? Nevertheless, they did not heed the voice of their father, because the Lord desired to kill them." So as in God's determination, these people were going to die because of the way that they behaved. But it's important to recognize, look in verse 29, he says, why do you kick, this is God speaking, why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering which I have commanded in my dwelling place, and honor your sons more than me, to make yourselves fat with the best of all the offerings of Israel, my people? Therefore the Lord God of Israel says, I said indeed that your house and the house of your father would walk before me forever. But now the Lord says, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Look in chapter 3. We have the Samuel's first prophecy in the dream that he had, or the vision, or the speaking with God. In verse 13, it says, for I have told him, this is God speaking to Samuel about Eli, I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows, because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. That alone should show us the significance, the importance of parenting. Now, I realize there are other things going on there. He was the high priest, they were the priests. He should have had control. But the fact is that he did have some measure of control. He had it in two different ways, in his family and also in the occupation. And he did not exercise that control, or it did not win them over to obeying the truth. There are things he could have done that he did not do. Now, as we think about this, that just stresses the importance of it to me. When we think about this, I want you to understand that I have two wonderful children, and I am 100% responsible for their greatness. Okay, maybe it's 50-50 with me and my wife, right? Unless you ask my kids, and then it's 0, 0, and 100. They're responsible for their own greatness. I'm being facetious here. I'm joking. And those of you who know me, I would never get up and say that was because of me. But it is interesting, isn't it, that when we talk about it, see it on Facebook, we talk about our kids at graduation, we tend to be the kind of people that says, my kids are great. I did a great job. We get the pat on the back when our kids are good. It's never, man, my kids are so awesome because they're just great people. It's because I trained them to be that way. Now, I'm being a little bit facetious here, but you understand what I'm saying. We take credit for it when the kids are doing good, but wait until they go off track. And what happens? Oh, that free will kicks in. That's not my fault. That's free will. See, we're seeing two extremes when we talk about that. One extreme is I'm totally responsible for my kids, how they behave, what they do. I have 100% control over them. And there are people who have tried to exercise that control. Now, when they're little bitty, yeah, you have a good point there. You need to be in control of your kids. I can't imagine what it would be like, though I know that it happens, where 6-year-olds actually run the household. Now, you have control over your kids, but the older they get, the less control you have. That's just the way life works. But some people have that such strict idea of control that they're going to control every single aspect, every single decision, every single small detail of their lives until they are grown. And then there's trouble. The trouble comes not because there's rebellion, there probably could be, but the trouble comes because they're not equipped to be able to stand on their own and make decisions on their own. And that's one extreme, to say that I'm in complete control. The other extreme is, well, they're kids. I don't have any control over what they do. They're going to pitch a fit, and they're going to do all kinds of things, and I can't control that in any way. In fact, I don't want to break their spirit, so I'm not going to do anything to stop it. And so we have, kids laying down in the floor at Walmart screaming and kicking. Thankfully, I haven't seen that lately very, very often, but I don't know, maybe it still happens. So we're talking about two extremes there, and most people don't fit in those. We try to find a happy medium somewhere, right? And we're having to figure out then how to do this parenting thing. And so that's what we're going to look at. We need to recognize that there are a lot of different factors that go into how a child is raised. There are a lot of different factors that go into the end product. All I know is child raising. My daughter is about to turn 19. She's about to turn 20. Oh, a year behind. She's about to turn 20, and it seems like this, just looking back, life was a huge whirlwind. There's just smoke and dust everywhere, and all of a sudden everything just stops, and there's a woman standing there. Now, how did that happen? It feels that way, and it's so fast. It's that way. That was the way with my son too. It was just a whirlwind. Of course, he creates the whirlwinds, but whirlwind of activity, and then everything stops, and he's standing there, and he's gotten married and living on his own. And it's like, what happened? Well, we need to figure out how to raise children. It doesn't just happen, and so we're going to look in Proverbs chapter 5. Verses 1 and 2, this is kind of give us a skeleton idea, skeleton outline for what I want to cover in the lesson. Looking at 5 steps to faithful children. And this, by the way, applies to all of us, and you'll see that as we go through. Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, he says, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom, lend your ear to my understanding, that you may preserve discretion, and your lips may keep knowledge. For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey." Okay, so verses 1 and 2 is what I intended to go to. And I want you to see a progression. There's actually 4 things mentioned here, and I'll throw in the 5th. But I want you to notice 4 things, and we're going to go in reverse order. Starting at the end of verse 2, he says, your lips keep knowledge. That'll be the first one we talk about, knowledge. But right before that, he says that you may preserve discretion. So we have knowledge, we have discretion. The end of verse 1, it says, lend your ear to my understanding. That's the third one. The fourth one is to pay attention to my wisdom. And that really is talking about knowledge. That's what we're going to be looking at according to, wisdom is the fourth one. So we've got knowledge, we've got discretion, we've got understanding, and we've got wisdom. And then the fifth one we're going to cover is faithfulness. And that's the goal. That's what we're looking for. Now, I'm not suggesting that the book of Proverbs has this neatly arranged, and so there's these 4 different steps, but there are differences and nuances of how these words are used that we're going to look at, and I've kind of arranged them, and it may be an arbitrary arrangement, but I hope you'll see the progression here, because we see that. We see how children progress, and we want them to progress, and they have to be able to see what their tract is looking like, especially as they grow older, and they start to understand a little bit about what you're trying to do in a home. And I hope this is what you're trying to do, and this is what education is all about. I do have my master's in education, and the more I've learned about education, the more in awe I am of how the Bible teaches and what the Bible teaches, and the importance of education in the home. As we see all throughout the Bible, it's so important that we understand that. So we're going to talk about the first one here. That is the idea of knowledge. And we know what knowledge is. It's the information about life. It's facts, the things that kids need to know. And there are a lot of ways that they get knowledge, and there's a lot of knowledge that they have to get, right? You know, 3rd graders today know a whole lot more than 3rd graders 50 years ago in some ways. Now, in some ways, they don't know as much. But as far as math, language, different things that they're learning in school, they're preparing for college already. They're starting to get ready for the steps. They have a goal, a plan of action that's going to take them through junior high and on through high school and on into college. So this is all part of that process, and there's a lot of information. We depend, if we send our kids to school, we depend on the schools to educate them properly, to give them knowledge. If you're homeschooling, you get to be in control of that. But still, we know there's a lot of knowledge, right? And it's not just all about multiplication. It's not all about history. There are a lot of things that you have to learn that go hand in hand with life. There's no reason to go into a whole lot of detail. But look in Proverbs chapter 22. In verse 6. Here it says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, but from what I've read, the idea here is to train up a child in the way he should go. That is in his particular bent. That is what he has propensity for. You know, all the children that are raised, for whatever reason, when they grow up, they tend to do certain things well. They tend to do things better than other things. We call that talent. It could be that. We could call it whatever we want to call it, but we do know that they have a propensity to do certain things. Some of them can draw, some of them can write, some of them can do math, and they can do all of it well, but we see how they are. Now, in homeschooling, this is one of the things I love about homeschooling is especially as they get older, they can see where they need to be working. You can see where they need to be flourishing, and you can help push them in that direction, and you can help them to really grow in a lot of different areas. And so that's a neat thing. But The pursuit of knowledge is so important. So it's so important then to give them a good structure, a good base, a good understanding. And I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't already know. Chapter 4 and verse 20 of Proverbs, it says, "My son, give attention to my words, incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your heart. Keep them in the midst of your heart." So we need to teach our children to pay attention, to learn all that they can, because it's going to be very important in the future. It's going to be very important to have that foundation, which they're going to actually revisit later. The next step, if we look in Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, how we're going backwards there, the next step was discretion. Now, this is the ability to make decisions. This is the ability to take information, knowledge, to take that knowledge and make decisions on that knowledge. Well, it's easy for us to make decisions about math. But here we're starting to get more into application about how to live, right? So they have knowledge, they can make decisions. They can make decisions based upon what you tell them. So the knowledge that they gain, they make decisions based on that. That's very important to understand. I know it's very, very basic. I don't mean to insult your intelligence. But we all know that children make decisions. We all know that they only make decisions based upon the things that they know, and we also know that they only know what we tell them or what other people tell them. Now, how important is it then for them to have the right facts? How important is it for them to have a teacher that loves God, that believes in God, that is willing to help them grow in a relationship with God? That's important. Why? Because they will make decisions. The decisions that they make are only going to be made off the knowledge that they have. There's no other way for them to make a decision, especially as a young age. So when children are told that they're animals, and believe me, they are told that they're animals. I've been in classrooms talking to kids in science class in 3rd grade, and I said, are humans animals? Yes, we are animals. We're classified as animals. So I said, how can you be an animal how does that make you any different from like a monkey? No difference. We're just like monkeys. When you have that knowledge, what kind of decision making are you going to have? When you have the knowledge that you can decide that you wake up one day and you say, I think I'm gay. I'm homosexual. And you have the knowledge that that's okay. That's the facts that you've been taught. We're going to be supportive of that. What's going to happen? You're going to have more and more kids that are going to wake up confused and say, I think I might be gay. And then, of course, they're going to jump all over it and say, of course you are. Aren't you courageous for expressing the truth? Well, it's all based upon facts. They may be false facts, but it's information. So we have to understand that children must learn discretion. We need to teach our children discretion, but the only thing they can do is decide on what information they have. But even the information they have, even if you had perfect teachers and you were a perfect homeschooler, if you're doing that at home, even if you taught your children constantly while they're at home, they're going to have friends and they're going to be introduced to new ideas and strange things. We all were, right? And we're going to make decisions. We have to learn discretion. We have to learn how to decide between two things. And I think there are a lot of people today that aren't teaching that idea. Logic, the idea of it is out the window. We tend to go by how we feel. What do you feel like today? What do you feel like doing? What do you feel like wearing? What do you feel like eating? And instead of making conscious decisions based upon information, we're going by how we feel. And that's generally how things go. Well, we understand that, but as a Christian parent, we need to see that our children are learning how to make decisions and how to make proper decisions. Well, that's going to take some guidance. Now, the world says there is no such thing as proper and improper. Believe me, they're saying that. Whatever you choose is right. But we know that our children have to make good decisions based upon good information, and we need to make sure we're teaching them that. So we're teaching them discretion. Proverbs chapter 1 in verse 4, for example, it says to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. That's why this book of Proverbs was written, to give knowledge and discretion, to teach how to make the right decisions. And he gives all kinds of examples in here about decisions that you make in life. He talks about peers. He talks about, you name it. It's in here. There's a lot of things that he covers. And so discretion is so important. Proverbs chapter 2 and verse 11 says, discretion will preserve you and understanding will keep you. Discretion will preserve your life. It will save you. And so we need to teach our children to have the ability to decide, make decisions. Now, if we take away all their decisions, we never let them make decisions, how are they going to learn how to do it? They're not, are they? We have to be appropriate to the age. A 3-year-old is not going to be able probably to walk into her closet and decide what she's going to wear out of all there. You can, however, hold up 2 things and say, which one do you want? If you choose to do that, which you don't have to, by the way. There's no law that says you can't pick the clothes for your child. In fact, it's probably a lot easier. I know in our household it was. We'd go up and say, which one you want? And they'd start talking about anything but the clothes, right? That's how they operated. And so we would just say, okay, you're wearing that. Well, that's good. But you'd have to eventually learn how to teach them how to be discreet. The next word here in that list from Proverbs chapter 5 was the word understanding. And this is the ability then to apply learning. That's the way it's used often parallel with wisdom. But I put it here because there's a step here that needs to be discussed. That is the ability to apply learning that you have learned, things that you have learned. You apply it to teach yourself what you need to know in order to apply some idea to your life. And in the previous part, the discretion, we make decisions based upon information that we've been taught. In this one, we're actually starting to get away from that and we're making decisions based upon what we've decided to learn. So we have opportunities, for example, in school. They have opportunities to learn about different things, and they can pursue these things at their own leisure. They can pursue these things all that they want to. We opened it up to our children in the homeschooling. They could pursue with gusto just whatever topic they wanted to, as long as they had certain obligations met. And so while they're pursuing these things, they're learning and they're teaching themselves certain ideas, and understanding means that they have the ability to take that knowledge and put it into practice in life. And that's a vital part of living that people need to understand. It's amazed me, and it hasn't been a lot, but it's amazed me that I've run across people that didn't seem to be able to take the knowledge that they had and put it into practice in their lives. I'll give you a perfect example, and this is an example that I do. I have all the knowledge in the world of how I should eat. You know where I'm going with this? And I don't always eat the way I should, right? I make bad decisions. Well, that's a situation of understanding. It's not that I don't have the understanding, but real understanding is when you start putting it into practice. That's how the scriptures define that. Look at, for example, in Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 29. Here it says, he who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. So an impulsive person exalts folly because, a foolish person is just going to run off the mouth. Anytime he gets angry, he's never going to control himself. But he says someone who then is slow at wrath shows that he has understanding. Why does he have understanding? Because he is able to take what he has learned and apply it in a pretty volatile situation and learn to keep his mouth shut. That takes knowledge. That takes understanding. And so you take knowledge of how we should behave and we put it into practice, then we're setting a good foundation for these kids. And it's important that we understand that. Chapter 15 and verse 14, he says, the heart of him who has understanding seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feeds on foolishness. So we need to be seeking truth. That's part of what understanding is. We have the capacity to put it into practice, but we also have the capacity to begin looking for truth ourselves, to making sure that what we are learning is right. Now, teens generally will exhibit this pretty well, but that doesn't mean, because usually through it seems like rebellion. It's not always rebellion, but that doesn't mean that they're getting the right information, but at least we can see that they're trying to exert themselves and figure out what is real and what is not real. What have I been taught? What is right? What is wrong? And many times your relationship with your children is going to determine whether or not they feel like they have to question everything that you've ever taught them. Because that's when we start getting in trouble. It's not that they can't make decisions or make good decisions. It's that whenever children start to question everything they've ever been taught, there's usually something going on. Now, they will question things. They should question things, but not everything. And the reason for that is because there should be some level of trust. Now, this will come later on during their growth. When they get out on their own, they'll start questioning even more. But if you have a child who is complete rebellion, doesn't think anything that you have to say is worth any merit, there's a problem there. The problem is a relationship problem. It's not a knowledge problem. Your relationship with that child needs to improve before you can build trust. And you can help them in this way. But understanding, this is where we need to be. Then the fourth point here is wisdom. After understanding, we have wisdom. And wisdom is really the ability to decide what to learn and apply. Now, understanding means that we can learn and we can make application, but we don't necessarily know what to learn. We're still dependent on our parents. We're still dependent on the school systems to say, here, try these different things. I think you'll learn this. I think you need some stuff here. And they can go learn, but they are still not the ones making the decision about what they're going to learn. And a lot of times, teenagers get caught in this, and they stay in this period the rest of their lives. I'm sure none of us fit that category. But think about yourself critically for a minute. When you talk about what wisdom is, have you learned the things that you're learning because you have sat down and said, I believe this is what I should be learning? Hopefully, we've all done that. But sometimes we get caught up in the routine of life, and we go along assuming all the things that we've ever been taught have always been true, and we never question it. Now, I'm not saying that you're wrong about anything. I'm saying that we have to think for ourselves. And a mature Christian, a mature person, is one that has the wisdom to be able to discern, have understanding, and to be able to decide which course he's going to pursue. To put it in a practical application, and we're looking at more of a worldly aspect, is when a teenager goes to college. That's a pretty trying time. I remember when I first went, I knew what I wanted to be, but there were a lot of people that around me had no idea what they were doing or why they were there, what they were going to have, what their goal was in life was going to be, because they had never thought about it. They had never sat down and tried to have some wisdom. And that's part of the age. That's the age that they were. I'm not being critical. That's just the way things are. And at that point, there was a lot of soul searching going on. Do I really want to do this? My soul searching honestly came whenever I saw the student loan application, and I had to put my name on the bottom. My soul searching came, do I really want to go in debt this much? Well, that's a whole different story, which I probably shouldn't have done. But the point is that there are aspects of this that we have to take a stock of ourselves. And we have to encourage our children to be able to do that as well, to think clearly for themselves and to decide what they need to learn. Another part of this, and this is part of how we as Christians, or just as simply as adults, need to operate. It's amazing sometimes that we fail to see our own weaknesses, right? We don't see where we need to make changes. Someone may point it out to us, and usually we don't like it very much. They may point it out to us, and we may think about it for a little bit, but we have a propensity to put blinders on, don't we? Or we look in the mirror and we see only what we like to see, not the stuff that we need to change. So as Christians, we need to be understanding, we need to have wisdom and decide for ourselves, where do we need to grow? What do I need to have happen in my life? How can I be better? And when a child is starting to ask that kind of question, you're doing something well, and they are growing and maturing well. If they're not asking that question, we need to help them come to the point where they do. Children mature at different ages. They mature at different speeds. We can't force anyone to be mature when they're not mature, but we need to be helping them to do that kind of thing. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7, here's an example of this thinking about how I need to make a decision about what I'm going to learn. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Knowledge here and wisdom are used parallel, so don't let that confuse you. But fools despise wisdom and instruction, but the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, or you may say wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. That's where it begins. But a child cannot have wisdom until they make the conscious decision that they're going to fear the Lord. Fear of the Lord here is not something that's inflicted upon someone. Fear of the Lord here is something that is decided upon within the heart. I choose to revere my God. I make the decision to respect Him the way I should. And the reason for that is because I know who He is. I know His character. I know what He can do to me. I know what I don't want to have to happen, but I also know who He is. And out of love and respect for Him, I will cherish His words and obey them. That's the fear of the Lord. It can't be inflicted upon them. You can't decide for them. They have to come to that decision themselves. And that's why it's so important that we teach them and instruct them and help them come to that point of being wise. Chapter 14 and verse 33 says, "Wisdom rests in the heart of him who has understanding, but what is in the heart of fools is made known." Wisdom here, he's talking about how a wise person will usually be quiet. They don't volunteer the information. You need to ask and draw it out of them. But he says wisdom rests in the heart of him who has understanding. So if a person who has understanding, which is actually what we just talked about earlier, having the ability to apply learning, that person then can have the ability to use wisdom. That he can decide for himself what he's going to learn and apply, use his understanding to apply. And then chapter 16 and verse 16 says, "How much better to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver." So gold and silver here showing understanding and wisdom. It's so much better to have that. We've got to push toward that with our children. We can pray about that. We can instruct them. We need to make sure we're using wisdom ourselves. A wise parent will look at that thing, and I know some of you may have already asked the question, well, how can I get my child to be wise? A wise parent will look into that and find out the information. You already know then what information you need, right? You're going to go pursue that information, and with your understanding, apply it to your life, and your children will benefit from that. Not only will they benefit, they're going to see it in action of how you can be wise. Make the decision to find the information that you need. And then the last one is faithfulness. And he didn't mention in Proverbs chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, the idea of faithfulness, but it's implied. The whole goal is that we're faithful. If your goal is anything other than, number one, raising a faithful child of God as a child, you're not doing your job as a parent. Your job is to raise faithful children, to raise disciples. Now, there's no question about that in the Scriptures. The reason for that is because it's your duty to make sure you give everything that your child needs for life. That your job is to help them to pursue what is the best of their life. And the best thing for their life is for them to be a Christian. Hands down, no question about it. So our duty, our job, if we're going to be successful as a parents, first, we must make sure our children become faithful Christians. There's nothing more important than that. Now, we can train them in all kinds of other things, and we should. We must do that. But I know too many parents are so worried about getting their kid to a college scholarship in sports that they're so worried about that they're not even worried about their relationship with God. That's messed up. It's reverse order. Now, if they can have a scholarship to a college and play ball, good, man, that's great. But we can do that with the right priorities. If we can't, it's not worth it. I would much rather have my child go through life as a janitor who is faithful Christian than someone who's a millionaire and unfaithful to God. Because I'll tell you what, I will spend a whole lot more time with him in eternity in heaven if he's the janitor. Now, if he can be both, he can be rich and go to heaven, even better. But that's not our focus. Our focus is on getting them to heaven. And if that's not our focus, we need to rethink things. Because, first of all, if that's not your focus, you don't have a proper understanding of what reality is. You yourself need to understand what the truth is. You need to use your understanding and use wisdom to learn more about who God is and what he's done and why it's so important to be a disciple of his, and apply that to your life and help your children live in faithfulness. That's what it's all about. So wisdom is faithfulness is using wisdom to know what you need to learn. You use your ability to learn that. That's understanding. You use discretion, and you choose what information you're going to learn and apply it to your life. That's what faithfulness is. That's what faithful Christians do all the time. We are always, constantly looking at, trying to find the truth. We're always making decisions about the truth that we know. We're always using our wisdom, our minds, to make sure we're pursuing the right information and learning the right things. And we're trying to figure out how to apply it to our lives in the best way possible. Now, if that's the way you live, your children should be emulating that as well. Because that's so important. That's how important it is. And this is what a disciple does. So our job as Christians is to raise disciples of Christ. But please, let's not go to extremes. I've seen people, when their child turned 13, they almost break out in a sweat. They're terrified. What if my child's not ready? What if my child needs to be baptized? I need to get my child baptized. Your child will be baptized if he's been taught correctly. He will be baptized when he's ready. And it's better to have him do it when he's ready than pushing him into something that he's not ready for. How many of us would say the same thing? Now, let me back up here just a little bit, because let's change the age. 19, 20, 30, and your child is still single. I know the panic. What if my kid never gets married? I'm never going to have grandkids, right? How many of us would go out immediately and say, okay, you've been dating this girl 3 days, you need to ask her to marry you. Right now, ask her to marry you. It's not going to happen. I hope that we didn't do that, but we're so quick to say, hey, you've got to have a relationship with Jesus right now. Get in the water. I've heard of, so it's hearsay, but I've heard of a couple of men that when their kid turned a certain age, they said, okay, it's time for you to be baptized. It's time to be baptized. I actually baptized these people later, and they told me that. So they were baptized, but they got wet. It didn't mean anything to them. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's not a tense period. It is a tense period. I felt very uncomfortable. I was so relieved when both of my children were baptized. But looking back on it, I don't know why I was so panicked about it. But don't let that sway you. Use your wisdom to understand that they are all going to grow at a different rate, a different pace, and that's okay. I believe with all of my heart that God is able and willing so that none should perish, that he is able to give time for repentance. The scriptures teach that. If he'll do that for everyone else, he'll do that for your child as well. So let's not put too much pressure on them. But this is what we should be working toward. So how do you do all this? And I understand I've thrown a lot out, and I can't give you answers for all these things. It would take too long. But there is one thing I can say, so how you can accomplish this, so you can, at the end, everything's said and done, you can have faithful Christians who are leaving your house, strong Christians. And that, I would say, number one, your priorities. What is most important to you? Your children may not emulate that. It may be the case where they have free will kick in and they just don't do it. But your chances of your child becoming a faithful Christian, if your priorities are wrong, are a whole lot worse than your chances of your child becoming a faithful Christian if your priorities are right. You stand a much, much, much greater chance of that child. And I don't say chance lightly. I say that lightly. It's not a chance thing. There are a lot of things that you can do. But if you want to impact your children the most, priorities. First things first. If first thing becomes second thing, your priorities are wrong. Your children will see that. You've got to be consistent with it so that your children see what's important. Now, consistency is very important. I can go through a whole list of things, and they need to have some stability in their lives. No question. That's what priorities do. Some people have looked at us and said, you've given no stability to your children because we've moved around a lot, and we have, and it's been tough on our kids. But I tell you what they do have. They have stability, not in the location where we live, but in the truth. Because the things that we taught them since they were 2 years old, we're still saying, we're still doing, we're still trying to, not perfectly by any means, but our priorities are still the same. And they see that. They can see that in you as well. So that's where we have to start. We have to look at our priorities. What is most important to you? And then don't be afraid to instruct your children, to tell them this is what you need to do. It's good if you can tell your children, hey, do what I say and do what I do. I've had times where I've had to tell my kids, don't do what I just did, but do what I tell you to do, right? We've all been there. That shouldn't be the exception. That should be the norm for us to say, do what I do. Let me show you how this happens. Genesis chapter 18 and verse 19, we have these words that God spoke about Abraham, and he said, for I know him, or I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. He knew that Abraham was going to teach his children and even his grandchildren and children after that. He knew that was going to be the case because he knew Abraham. That should be the same thing said about us. Now, I don't want to come across like I have all the answers or I've got it all figured out. My children are young still, and there's always, I have no idea what the future holds. But I have great confidence that what God has taught them and what they're able to see in the Scriptures is going to continue to grow and produce in them. That's what I'm hoping for and praying for. That's what we're all praying for, right? For our own children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren. We want to see that. I was talking to a man recently, a friend of mine. We were talking about the empty nest part. Ours is about gone. So we're almost there. And I was talking to a couple who are actually in the empty nest now. Their kids are gone. And I was kind of a little bit down. When kids first get out of the house, they don't always come around as much. I hear it probably doesn't get much better. So I was a little bit down. And I said, I just wish... I just want to know if this is normal. He said, Jason, when I raised my children, I raised them for an empty nest. I wanted them to leave. Do you want your kids living in your basement for the rest of their lives? Part of me does. But no, that's not going to happen. That's not going to work, right? Unless they pay rent. No, we don't want that, right? We want them to be successful and happy. And if they're walking out of the door and they think they did all the work and you know what that means? That means that they have had the ability to look at their lives and make decisions, and they have built and shored up their faith. I should be happy about that. So when your children leave and they don't look back, don't think it's necessarily because you did everything wrong. You could have been doing it right, especially if they're living faithful. That's a little side note. It helped me feel better. Maybe it'll help some of you feel better too. But the highest goal of education is to teach what Jesus said in Matthew 22:34 through 40. That is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And if we're in teaching our children priorities, we're not teaching our children to love God with everything that we have. And in our priorities, we're not teaching them to serve other people in love. We are not teaching priorities. We can teach them about coming to church. We can teach them about reading the Bible. Those are great things. But the number one commandment is not read your Bible every day, is it? Yeah, you should. The number one commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And if they love their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength, they will pursue a relationship with him by digging into his word. You can't do anything better than that. You're teaching them to want to be with God. That's a whole lot better than teaching facts. Teach them the facts, teach them to pursue the facts, and then we can have a right relationship with God. But that's the idea, that's the whole purpose. That should be our whole purpose of all of our education system. In fact, the education system in America was founded for that very reason. When it was first founded, it was founded so that our children could learn to read and write, so that they could study the Bible. That was the reason we had education. That's why we had schools. Of course, it's very much different from now, but that's why we had it. That should be why you have children, to raise them up in this nurture and admonition of the Lord, Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4. And don't provoke them to wrath, but raise them up as God would have us to do.